The transport ship descended through Earth's atmosphere with the precision that came from centuries of diplomatic missions. Ambassador Zekthor stood at the viewing port, his scales gleaming under the cabin lights as he watched the primitive planet grow larger. This would be his 48th youth assessment, and he expected it to go exactly like the previous 47. Ambassador, we are approaching the designated coordinates, his navigator, Silith, announced from her station. The human authorities have confirmed that the juveniles are gathered and waiting. Zekthor's inner eyelids flickered with satisfaction. Waiting. That was already a good sign. It showed they understood the importance of this visit. The Valorian Confederation had been conducting these assessments for over 3 centuries. Ever since they discovered that establishing proper dominance hierarchies with a species' youth made all future diplomatic relations smoother. Young minds were malleable, easily impressed by displays of power and superiority. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 3 years ago, and they were still learning their place among the stars. The Confederation had been patient, allowing them time to adjust, but now it was time for the proper protocols. Time for Earth's children to understand that humans were newcomers, and newcomers needed to show respect. The ship landed in a clearing surrounded by tall trees. Zekthor had reviewed the location data. Camp Pinecrest, they called it. A summer recreational facility in the Rocky Mountains, where human juveniles were sent for educational and social development. Primitive, but it would serve the purpose. 50 juveniles, aged 8 to 14 standard Earth years along with their supervisors. A perfect sample size. The loading ramp extended with a hydraulic hiss. Zekthor straightened to his full height of 7 feet, his spinal frills extending slightly. He descended the ramp with slow, deliberate steps, his diplomatic team following in precise formation behind him. Every movement was calculated to project power and control. The human adults stood in a small group near a wooden building. One of them, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical style, stepped forward. She wore clothing appropriate for outdoor activities and had the lean build of someone who spent considerable time in physical pursuits. "Welcome to Camp Pinecrest," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "I'm Director Chen. We're honored to host you." Zekthor ignored the hand as was proper. Accepting familiar gestures too quickly diminished the necessary psychological distance. "I am Ambassador Zekthor of the Valorian Confederation. We are here to conduct the standard youth assessment protocol. You have been briefed on what this entails?" "We have," Director Chen said, lowering her hand without apparent offense. "The children are waiting in the main field. I should mention that we've asked them to be on their best behavior for your visit." "That will not be necessary," Zekthor replied. "We prefer to observe natural responses. However, their cooperation will be noted favorably in our reports." Director Chen's mouth curved slightly, an expression Zekthor's briefing materials identified as a smile. Humans smiled for many reasons, most involving positive emotions. She was pleased they had come. Good. The walk to the main field took only a few minutes. As they rounded the corner of a large wooden structure, Zekthor saw the assembled juveniles. They sat in loose rows on the grass, talking among themselves with the casual disorder typical of young beings. Their supervisors stood at the edges, watching carefully. Zekthor positioned himself at the front, his team spreading out on either side. The human juveniles grew quiet, their attention focusing on the visitors. Zekthor took a moment to observe them. They appeared remarkably fragile compared to Valorian young, soft skin with no natural armor, small teeth, minimal muscle development. Their eyes showed curiosity but no immediate fear response. That would change. "Juveniles of Earth," Zekthor began, his voice dropping to the deep resonance that activated his species' natural intimidation responses. "You are witnessing representatives of the Valorian Confederation, one of the founding civilizations of the galactic community. We have traveled the stars for 3,000 of your years. We have seen worlds beyond counting and species beyond number." He paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle. Then he triggered his primary dominance display. His spinal frills extended to their full width, nearly doubling his apparent size. The chromatophores in his scales activated, creating patterns of dark reds and blacks that signaled aggression in 47 known species. His jaw opened to display rows of sharp teeth, and he released a low-frequency rumble that bypassed conscious hearing to trigger instinctive fear responses in most carbon-based life forms. The human juveniles, remained silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then, they burst into applause. Zekthor's frills collapsed slightly in confusion. Applause? That was a gesture of appreciation, of entertainment. His briefing materials had been very clear about this. That was so cool. A small human with dark curly hair shouted, "Can you do it again?" "The colors changed," another juvenile exclaimed. "Did you see the colors?" A female juvenile in the front row raised her hand, waving it energetically. "Mr. Ambassador? Mr. Ambassador, can I touch your scales? Are they hard or soft? Are they like alligator scales or snake scales or something totally different?" Zekthor stood frozen, his carefully prepared intimidation display still partially active. This was not the standard response. Fear, submission, awed silence, those were the standard responses. Not request to touch his scales. Silith stepped forward, her diplomatic training allowing her to maintain composure. "The ambassador's display is a traditional greeting from our people," she said smoothly, which was technically true if one interpreted greeting broadly. "It shows respect for those we visit." "That's awesome," a larger juvenile male said. He had short dark hair and an expression of intense interest. "So it's like when we dress up formally for important visitors, except biological instead of clothing-based. That's fascinating from an evolutionary standpoint. Do all Valorians have the same color change capabilities, or is there individual variation? Is it neurologically controlled or hormonal?" Zekthor's translator was working perfectly, but the words still seemed nonsensical. This juvenile was analyzing his intimidation display as though it were an academic subject. "I am Marcus," the juvenile continued. "My parents are xenobiologists. They study alien life forms. They're going to be so jealous when I tell them I met actual Valorians. They have so many questions about your species' evolutionary history." "Yes, well," Zekthor said, struggling to regain control of the situation. "The purpose of our visit is to help you understand the galactic community and your species' place within it. Are you going to show us your ship?" A small female juvenile called out. "Does it have faster-than-light engines? What kind? Can we see inside? Do you have any cool weapons?" Another juvenile asked, "Can you teach us alien words? Do you eat human food? Can you breathe our air okay, or is it hard for you?" The questions came rapid fire, each juvenile apparently competing to ask the most queries in the shortest time. Zekthor felt his careful protocol slipping away like sand through his claws. Director Chen stepped forward, placing 2 fingers in her mouth and producing a sharp, piercing whistle. The juveniles immediately fell silent. "Kids, let's give our guests a chance to breathe," she said. "Ambassador Zekthor has a program planned for you. I'm sure your questions will be answered as we go." She looked at Zekthor, and he could swear that smile had grown slightly wider. "Please continue with your assessment." Zekthor's secondary brain, the one that handled threat evaluation and survival instincts, sent him a very clear message that something was wrong with this scenario, but his primary brain, trained through decades of diplomatic service, insisted that he simply needed to follow the standard protocol more firmly. "Very well," he said, his frills extending once more. "Let us begin with a demonstration of Valorian cultural achievements. Silith, prepare the holographic display." As his navigator activated their portable projector, Zekthor told himself that this initial confusion was merely a cultural misunderstanding. Once the juveniles saw recordings of Valorian military might and technological superiority, they would develop the proper respect they always did. Behind him, Silith caught the eye of their security officer and transmitted a private message on their neural network. "This is not proceeding according to protocol," the security officer responded immediately. "Agreed. These juveniles show no fear response whatsoever. Should we escalate to secondary protocols?" Silith watched as the holographic display activated, showing a towering Valorian warrior in full combat armor. The human juveniles leaned forward with interest, several of them pointing and whispering to each other with clear excitement. "Stand by," she transmitted back. "I have a feeling secondary protocols won't work either." The holographic presentation had lasted 45 minutes. Zekthor had shown images of Valorian military victories, technological marvels, and the vast extent of the Confederation's territorial holdings. Each image had been carefully selected to inspire awe and a proper sense of scale regarding humanity's junior position in galactic affairs. The human juveniles had watched with rapt attention, occasionally whispering to each other and pointing at details in the images. When the presentation ended, they applauded again. Then they raised their hands with more questions. How do the plasma weapons avoid overheating? The one called Marcus asked. Do you use magnetic containment or some kind of advanced cooling system? Why do your ships use that hull configuration? Another juvenile inquired. It seems like it would create unnecessary drag in atmospheric flight. That battle on Kepler 442b looked really hard, a small female said sympathetically. Did lots of Valorians get hurt? That must have been scary. Zekthor's diplomatic smile had begun to feel strained. Scary. The juvenile was expressing concern for Valorian warriors, not fear of their capabilities. This was wrong. Everything about this situation was wrong. The presentation was meant to demonstrate the power of the Confederation, he said, his voice tight. To help you understand the might of those who have come before you among the stars. Oh, we understand, Director Chen said from her position at the edge of the field. The kids are very impressed. Aren't you kids? A chorus of agreement rose from the juveniles. They were impressed. But impressed was not the same as intimidated, and Zekthor was beginning to realize that his standard protocol was failing completely. That evening, after the juveniles had gone to their evening meal, Zekthor convened an emergency meeting aboard the ship with his team. This is unacceptable, he said, pacing the length of the conference room. We have conducted youth assessments on 47 worlds, 47, and never, not once, have we encountered a response like this. The juveniles appear to lack any fear response to our displays, his security officer Krell Nock observed. This is abnormal for beings at their developmental stage. Perhaps human psychology is fundamentally different from the species we have previously encountered, Silith suggested carefully. Their evolutionary history. I do not care about their evolutionary history, Zekthor interrupted. I care about completing this assessment properly. We must establish the correct psychological framework for future human confederation relations. If these juveniles do not learn to respect our superiority, how will they function as adults in the galactic community? He accessed his communication link to the Confederation Oversight Committee. The response came within minutes. The committee members had reviewed his initial reports and the recorded footage from the day's activities. Your analysis is concerning, Ambassador, the committee chairman said through the holographic display. However, this situation is not unprecedented. Some species require more direct demonstration of dominance hierarchies. We recommend escalating to the fear assessment protocols. The fear assessment? Salith said, her scales paling slightly. That seems extreme for juveniles. The committee has reviewed the data, the chairman replied. These humans show abnormal psychological profiles. More direct methods are required. You are authorized to proceed with Level 2 protocols. The connection ended. Zekthor turned to his team, his decision made. Prepare for tomorrow's demonstration. We will show them something that generates a proper fear response. The next morning, Zekthor gathered the juveniles in the main field again. This time his entire team was present and their ship hovered visibly overhead. Its weapon systems visible but not activated. Today, Zekthor announced, you will participate in a fear assessment exercise. This is a standard evaluation conducted on all developing worlds. You will be presented with a simulated threat scenario, and your responses will be recorded for analysis. Like a drill? One juvenile asked. We do fire drills and earthquake drills at school. Similar, Zekthor said, though it was not similar at all. When the exercise begins, you will see and hear simulated combat conditions. You should respond as you naturally would to a threatening situation. Director Chen had been informed of the exercise and had given her reluctant approval, though she had insisted on keeping the intensity at minimal levels. Zekthor had agreed, though he privately believed even minimal intensity would be sufficient to generate the proper responses. He signaled to his team. The simulation began. The ship overhead activated its holographic projectors, creating the image of incoming attack craft. Sound generators produced the roar of engines and the shriek of energy weapons. The ground rumbled with carefully calibrated vibrations. Smoke generators created the appearance of impacts around the field's perimeter. Zekthor watched carefully, waiting for the juveniles to scatter, to cry out, to show fear. Instead, they immediately organized into groups. Team A, take the north side, one of the older juveniles shouted. Team B, you're south. Team C, secure the cabins. I see 5 bogies incoming from the east. Another juvenile called out, shading her eyes as she stared at the holographic ships. Are we using standard point system or capture rules? Marcus yelled over the sound effects. What? Zekthor said, his frills flattening in confusion. This is not a game. Oh, sorry. One of the smaller juveniles called back. Are we supposed to just watch? That's less fun, but okay. The juveniles settled into their groups, watching the simulated battle with obvious interest. Several of them pointed out tactical details to each other. A few kept score of simulated hits and misses. One juvenile produced a small electronic device and appeared to be recording the event. Not one of them looked afraid. Zekthor increased the intensity. The sounds grew louder. The holographic impacts came closer to the juvenile positions. The ground shaking intensified. Wow, that one was close, a juvenile exclaimed happily. Do you think they'll bring in ground units next? Another asked. That would be tactically logical. Maybe we should split up more, a third suggested. We're all clustered together. That's bad strategy if this was real. Zekthor terminated the simulation with a sharp gesture. The sound effects cut off. The holographic ships vanished. Silence fell over the field, broken only by the wind in the trees. Did we do it wrong? One of the smaller juveniles asked, looking worried for the first time. But she was not worried about the simulation. She was worried about disappointing the ambassador. You showed no fear, Zekthor said, his voice barely controlled. You were presented with a threatening scenario and you showed no fear response at all. Well, yeah, Marcus said, pushing his hair back from his forehead. We knew it wasn't real. You told us it was a simulation. Why would we be scared of something we know isn't real? To assess your psychological responses to threat stimuli, Kralnak interjected. This is standard protocol. But we do this kind of thing all the time, a female juvenile with red hair said. Last summer we did a zombie survival camp. That was way scarier because the counselors dressed up and chased us. This was cool, but it was obviously just holograms and sound effects. Zombie survival camp? Silith repeated faintly. Yeah, the counselors pretend to be zombies and we have to complete missions while avoiding them. It's awesome. We should do that with you guys. You'd make great zombies with those teeth. Zekthor felt a headache forming behind his optical ridge. This was impossible. These juveniles were treating a fear assessment protocol like entertainment. They were offering suggestions for improvements. They were not afraid. Director Chen approached, that same slight smile still on her face. Perhaps we should break for lunch, she suggested. Give everyone a chance to rest. Yes, Zekthor said numbly. Lunch. As the juveniles filed away toward their dining facility, chattering excitedly about the morning's events, Silith moved to stand beside her ambassador. Sir, she said quietly, I have been researching human evolutionary history. I think you need to see this. She displayed information on her personal data pad. Zekthor read through the data, his scales slowly paling as he processed the information. Humans were persistence predators. They evolved alongside creatures that could kill them easily, yet they survived by refusing to give up. They hunted prey by following it until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their history was filled with megafauna that should have eliminated them, but somehow they prevailed. They were a species that looked at something bigger, stronger and more dangerous than themselves and thought, I can take that. This explains nothing, Zekthor said, but his voice lacked conviction. They are juveniles. Young beings should show fear responses regardless of evolutionary history. Should they? Silith asked. Or do we assume that because every other species we have met does so? What if humans are simply different? Zekthor did not answer. He was watching the juveniles through the window of their dining facility. They were laughing and talking, apparently unaffected by the morning's activities. He had one more option, one more escalation available under the protocols. He would bring out the constructs. The constructs arrived on a transport shuttle just after lunch. They were humanoid robots, 7 feet tall, built from gleaming metal alloy and designed to look menacing. Each one carried training weapons that could project harmless but realistic-looking energy pulses. They had been used successfully in youth assessments on 19 different worlds. Zekthor watched as his team unloaded 6 of the constructs in the clearing behind the main camp buildings. Their optical sensors glowed with artificial red light. Their movements were fluid and slightly unnatural, designed to trigger instinctive wariness in biological observers. These are very expensive pieces of equipment, Kralnak noted as he activated the construct's main power systems. If the humans damage them, The Confederation will not be pleased. The constructs are built to withstand significant force, Zekthor replied, and human juveniles are small and weak. There is no danger of damage. Silith said nothing, but her scales had taken on a worried purple tint. She had spent the previous evening reading more about human development, and what she had learned disturbed her. Human juveniles were not raised in the protected, careful manner of most civilized species. They were encouraged to take risks, to confront challenges, to test their limits. The information described something called adventure playgrounds, where juveniles climbed high structures, built with real tools and engaged in activities that seemed deliberately dangerous, but she kept her concerns to herself. Zekthor was determined to complete this assessment properly, and she was not senior enough to override his decisions. The juveniles gathered in the main field again, this time with visible excitement. Word had spread that something new was happening, and they arrived chattering about what it might be. Maybe they'll let us see. Inside the ship, one hoped. Maybe they brought alien food too. Try, another suggested. Maybe they're going to show us more cool technology, Marcus said, his eyes bright with anticipation. Zekthor positioned himself at the front of the assembly. Juveniles of Earth, he began. We have brought training equipment used by the Confederation military. These constructs are designed to simulate combat scenarios. They will demonstrate what a genuine threat looks like. He signaled to Kralnak. The 6 constructs entered the field in precise formation, their movements synchronized and mechanical. Their optical sensors swept across the assembled juveniles. Their weapon arms moved through targeting sequences. The juveniles leaned forward with interest. Are those robots? A small male juvenile asked loudly. Affirmative, one of the constructs responded in its synthesized voice. We are automated combat training units, and that's so cool. Several juveniles exclaimed simultaneously. Zekthor's headache was returning. These are not toys, he said firmly. These are military training devices. They are meant to prepare soldiers for actual combat situations. Can they think for themselves or are they programmed? Marcus asked. What's their processing capacity? Are they networked or do they operate independently? That is not relevant to this demonstration, Zekthor said. What matters is that you understand. I bet we could capture one, an older female juvenile said thoughtfully. She had blonde hair pulled back in a complex braid and calculating eyes. If we work together. Yeah. Another juvenile agreed. Like capture the flag, but with robots. No, Zekthor said firmly. You will not capture anything. You will observe while the constructs demonstrate their capabilities. But the juveniles were already organizing themselves into groups, discussing strategy in rapid, excited voices. Several of them were studying the terrain, pointing out natural cover and approach routes. Director Chen watched from the sideline with her arms crossed and an expression that might have been amusement. Constructs, Zekthor commanded. Begin demonstration sequence Gamma. The constructs moved with sudden speed, spreading out across the field. Their weapons powered up with a distinctive whine. Energy pulses shot into the air, creating bright flashes and sharp cracking sounds. The constructs advanced toward the juveniles in a coordinated pattern designed to appear threatening. The juveniles scattered, but not in panic. They moved in organized groups using the trees and camp buildings for cover. They were treating this exactly like the game they had suggested. Team A, flank left, the blonde juvenile shouted. Team B, create a distraction center. Team C, circle around behind. This is not a game, Zekthor bellowed, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The juveniles executed their improvised strategy with surprising efficiency. The smaller ones darted out from cover, drawing the construct's attention. The larger ones moved through the tree line, working their way behind the robot formation. They grabbed fallen branches, worked together to haul a small log, and generally approached the situation with tactical thinking that should have been beyond their developmental stage. One construct found itself surrounded by 6 juveniles who had coordinated their approach perfectly. They threw a net. Where had they gotten a net? Over its sensor array, temporarily blinding it. Another construct got its leg stuck when juveniles used a rope to trip it into a deliberate pit that Director Chen used for campfire gatherings. Stop this immediately, Zekthor commanded. Director Chen put 2 fingers in her mouth and delivered another piercing whistle. The juveniles froze in place, though several looked disappointed. Okay, kids, that's enough, she said. Let's let our guests retrieve their equipment. The juveniles stepped back, allowing Kralnak and the other Valorians to help the constructs back to their feet. The net was removed. The rope was untied. The constructs appeared undamaged but somehow diminished, their menacing appearance undermined by the fact that they had been successfully outmaneuvered by creatures a third their size. "How did you do that?" Silith asked, approaching Marcus and his group. "You had no weapons, no training with these specific units. How did you coordinate so effectively?" Marcus shrugged. "We play games like this all the time. Capture the flag, manhunt, hide and seek. You learn to work together and use the environment. Plus, they're robots. They move in predictable patterns. Once you figure out the pattern, you can plan around it." "But you are juveniles," Silith said, struggling to understand. "You should not have tactical combat thinking yet. Most species do not develop such capabilities until they reach maturity." "We're not fighting a war," the blonde juvenile said. Her name was Katie, Silith had learned. "We're playing. There's a difference. Playing is fun. We pretend to be soldiers or survivors or explorers. That's just how we play. You pretend to be in danger," Silith said slowly. "For entertainment?" "Well, yeah," Katie replied as though this was obvious. "What else would we do? Just sit around?" That evening, as the juveniles roasted something called marshmallows over a fire pit, Zekthor sat in his ship and stared at the mission logs. By every measurable standard, his assessment was a complete failure. The juveniles had shown no fear. They had turned every demonstration into a game. They had outmaneuvered military-grade constructs using nothing but teamwork and environmental awareness. "Ambassador," Silith said from the doorway, "the juveniles have requested our presence at their evening activities." "Why?" Zekthor asked wearily. "They wish to share their cultural practices with us. Director Chen says it is a bonding opportunity." "I do not want to bond," Zekthor said. "I want to complete this assessment and leave this planet." "Nevertheless, refusing might be seen as diplomatically inappropriate," Silith pointed out. "We have asked them to participate in our protocols. Perhaps we should reciprocate." Zekthor's secondary brain sent him another warning signal, but his training and pride would not allow him to refuse. He followed Silith to the fire pit where the juveniles had gathered in a circle. "Ambassador Zekthor," several of them called out happily. "Come sit with us." They made space in the circle. Zekthor sat awkwardly on a log, his large frame not suited to the informal seating arrangement. One of the juveniles handed him a long stick with a white, soft object on the end. "That's a marshmallow," the juvenile explained. "You hold it over the fire until it gets golden brown. Then you eat it. It's a camp tradition." Zekthor held the stick over the flames, feeling absurd. Around him, the juveniles chatted happily. Their earlier excitement from the construct encounter already transformed into stories they told and retold, embellishing details. "Okay," Katie said once everyone had prepared their marshmallows. "Who wants to tell a scary story?" "Ooh, me!" a small male juvenile said. "I know a really good one about a haunted cabin." "Scary story?" Zekthor asked. "It's tradition," Director Chen explained. She had joined the circle as well, sitting comfortably on a log with her own marshmallow. "At camp, we tell stories meant to frighten each other. The kids love it." "You deliberately frighten your own juveniles?" Zekthor said, shocked. "It's fun," Katie said. "Being scared when you know you're actually safe is exciting." "Haven't you ever enjoyed being scared?" Zekthor had not. Valorians avoided fear as a sign of weakness. The entire concept of seeking out fear for entertainment was alien to him. The small male juvenile began his story. It involved a camp counselor who had disappeared decades ago and was said to haunt the old cabin at the edge of the property. His ghost supposedly appeared on nights when the moon was full, looking for his lost campers. The message from the Confederation came early the next morning. Zekthor had been required to submit a progress report, and the committee had reviewed his findings with growing concern. Now they demanded a video conference, and the tone of the message suggested this was not optional. Zekthor stood in the ship's communication chamber as the holographic images of the committee members materialized around him. 5 senior officials representing 5 different species, all with expressions that ranged from confused to annoyed. "Ambassador," the chairman said without preamble, "your reports are deeply concerning. You have failed to establish any meaningful fear response in the human juveniles, despite multiple escalations." "That is correct," Zekthor admitted. "The humans appear to have a fundamentally different psychological response to intimidation than any species we have previously encountered. That cannot be, said committee member Thelax, a species known for their psychological expertise. All juveniles show fear responses. It is a survival mechanism. Without it, a species would not survive to develop intelligence. I can only report what I have observed, Zekthor replied. These juveniles do not respond to our standard protocols. They treat threat scenarios as entertainment. They organize tactically instead of scattering. They show curiosity instead of submission. Perhaps the issue is not with the humans, suggested Varmoth, the Quillian representative. Her species resembled Earth rabbits, and she had been advocating for caution regarding humanity since their first contact. Perhaps the issue is with our protocols. Our protocols have been effective for 3 centuries, the chairman said sharply. We are not changing them for one anomalous species. Then what do you suggest? Zekthor asked. I have exhausted the approved escalation levels. The committee members conferred privately on a separate channel. Zekthor waited, his scales twitching with suppressed frustration. Finally, the chairman spoke. We are authorizing a level 4 escalation, he said. You will invite human adults to the facility. We need to determine if this fear resistance is limited to juveniles or extends to the entire species. If the adults show proper responses, we can work with them to modify their child-rearing practices. Zekthor's frills flattened. Bringing adults into a youth assessment was highly irregular. But he was out of options. As you command, he said. 2 days later, on the designated visitors' weekend, the parents began arriving. Zekthor watched from the ship as ground vehicles pulled into the parking area, and humans emerged carrying bags and packages. The juveniles ran to greet them with obvious excitement, and the adults embraced their offspring with displays of affection. Director Chen had arranged for the Valorian team to meet the parents in the main lodge. As the adults filed in, Zekthor took the opportunity to observe them carefully. They were larger than the juveniles, certainly, with more developed musculature and height, but they still appeared remarkably fragile compared to Valorian adults. Soft skin, no natural armor, teeth too small to be effective weapons. Thank you all for coming, Director Chen said, addressing the assembled parents. The Valorian delegation has requested this meeting to discuss their observations of the children. Ambassador Zekthor, would you like to begin? Zekthor stood, his full height once again deployed to create maximum impression. Parents of Earth, he began. We have been conducting a standard youth assessment with your offspring. The purpose of these assessments is to ensure that developing species understand the proper hierarchies within the galactic community. Hierarchies? One of the parents asked. She was a tall woman with dark skin and sharp, intelligent eyes. You mean you're trying to figure out where humanity ranks compared to other species? That is a simplified but essentially accurate interpretation, Zekthor replied. And how do we rank? Asked a man with graying hair and the kind of muscular build that suggested regular physical training. That is what we are attempting to determine, Zekthor said carefully. However, your juveniles have not responded to our protocols in the expected manner. The kids said you brought robots and holograms, another parent said. They had a great time. It was not meant to be a great time, Zekthor said, his voice tight. It was meant to establish proper psychological frameworks. A woman near the front raised her hand. She had bright red hair and wore practical clothing, marked with various scientific symbols. I'm Dr. Sarah Kim, xenobiologist. Can I ask what you mean by proper psychological frameworks? Fear and respect for superior species, Kralnock interjected. This is standard across the galactic community. You were trying to scare our kids? The gray-haired man said, his tone suddenly dangerous. Not scare, Zekthor said quickly. Merely establish appropriate caution and recognition of the power differential between established and newer species. By frightening children, Dr. Kim said flatly. By educating them, Zekthor corrected. The gray-haired man stood up. He was tall for a human, though still shorter than Zekthor. But something about his posture and the way he moved suggested combat training. I'm Sergeant Davis, retired Marine Corps. Let me make sure I understand. You came to Earth, gathered a bunch of kids at summer camp, and spent 3 days trying to intimidate them? That is an inflammatory way to describe standard diplomatic protocol, Zekthor said. And it didn't work, Sergeant Davis continued, a smile growing on his face. They weren't scared at all, were they? The juveniles showed abnormal psychological responses, Zekthor admitted. Laughter rippled through the assembled parents. Not polite diplomatic laughter, but genuine amusement. Several of them looked at each other with expressions that suggested they found this entire situation hilarious. Of course they weren't scared, Dr. Kim said, still smiling. They're kids at summer camp. They spend all year looking forward to this. They're here to have adventures, play games, and test themselves. You'd need a lot more than robots and holograms to frighten them. Yeah, try showing up at one of their Fortnite tournaments, another parent called out. Those kids are ruthless. I do not understand, Zekthor said, feeling control of the situation slipping away again. Do you not teach your juveniles to fear dangerous things? We teach them to respect dangerous things, Sergeant Davis said. That's different from fear. We teach them to assess risks, work together, and stay calm in difficult situations. Fear gets you killed. Training keeps you alive. But they are juveniles, Silith said, speaking up for the first time. Most species protect their young from danger, not train them to confront it. Most species aren't humans, Dr. Kim replied. We're persistence predators from a death world. Our ancestors survived by being too stubborn to give up and too clever to give in. We don't raise our kids to hide from challenges. We raise them to meet challenges head-on. That is insane, Kralnak said. That's humanity, Sergeant Davis replied cheerfully. Perhaps we could move to a practical demonstration, Director Chen suggested. Ambassador, you mentioned wanting to understand human responses to your protocols. Why don't you show the parents what you showed the children? Zekthor hesitated. This was spiraling away from anything resembling standard procedure. But he had the committee's authorization, and retreating now would be admitting complete failure. Very well, he said, if you will accompany us to the main field. The parents followed the Valorian team outside. The juveniles came too, excited to see their parents experience what they had experienced. Zekthor activated the constructs again, bringing all 6 online. He initiated the holographic display system on the ship, preparing for a full demonstration. This is what your juveniles experienced, he announced. Then he triggered the full sequence. Constructs advanced. Holograms filled the sky with attacking ships. Sound effects created the roar of combat. The ground shook with simulated impacts. It was Level 3 Intimidation Protocol, the most intense display approved for inhabited worlds. The parents watched with calm interest. A few of them pulled out personal communication devices and recorded the display. Dr. Kim walked closer to one of the constructs, examining its design with obvious scientific curiosity. Sergeant Davis assessed the tactical situation with professional detachment, occasionally nodding as though approving of certain maneuvers. When the display ended, the parents applauded just as their children had done. That was impressive, Dr. Kim said. The holographic technology is remarkably sophisticated. Can I ask what projection system you're using? The ground effects were well coordinated, Sergeant Davis noted. Good use of multisensory stimulation. In actual combat, though, you'd want more irregular patterns. The timed sequences make it too predictable. Are you not frightened? Zekthor demanded. Do you not understand what you witnessed? We understand we witnessed a demonstration using holographic projections and training robots, another parent replied. It was well done, but it wasn't real. But if it were real, Zekthor pressed. If those ships were actual attack craft, if the constructs were genuine soldiers, would you not be afraid then? Sergeant Davis looked at him for a long moment. Sure, he said finally. I'd be afraid. Fear is a natural response to danger. But I'd still function. I'd still fight. Because that's what you do when something threatens you or your family. You don't freeze. You don't submit. You fight. 3 days after the parents' visit, the Galactic Confederation Oversight Committee arrived without warning. Their ship entered Earth's atmosphere with the kind of speed and directness that indicated serious displeasure. Zekthor received notification that a full council review had been convened, and his presence was required immediately. The council chamber was set up in orbit, a neutral space where 7 different species could meet comfortably. Zekthor stood in the center, while holographic representatives of the Oversight Committee materialized around him. To his surprise, several high-ranking officials he had never met before were present, including Ambassador Velkoth of the Quillian Alliance and Commodore Thex of the Confederation Military. Ambassador Zekthor, the chairman began, his voice cold. We have reviewed your complete mission logs, including all recorded interactions with the humans. We have also received several formal complaints. Complaints? Zekthor's frills flattened. From whom? From me, said a new voice. A human appeared among the holographic representatives. He was middle-aged, with gray hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested high authority. I'm Ambassador James Rodriguez, Earth's primary representative to the Confederation, and I'm here to discuss why a foreign power conducted psychological operations against children on my planet without proper authorization. It was a standard youth assessment. Zekthor protested. We have conducted thousands of such assessments. Against species that apparently respond to intimidation, Ambassador Rodriguez replied. Humans do not, which you discovered through 3 days of increasingly aggressive attempts to frighten children at summer camp. The protocols were approved by this committee, Zekthor said, looking to the chairman for support. The protocols were designed for species with predictable fear responses, the chairman said. Your reports make it clear that humans do not fit this category. Yet you continue to escalate. I was following procedure, Zekthor insisted. You were trying to establish dominance over another species through psychological manipulation, Ambassador Rodriguez said flatly. That's not diplomacy. That's bullying. The Confederation has always established proper hierarchies, Commodore Thex interjected. This is how peaceful coexistence is maintained. Every species must understand their place, and where exactly is humanity's place? Ambassador Rodriguez asked, his tone dangerous. The council chamber fell silent. It was the question everyone had been avoiding since humanity's first contact. Where did humans fit in the galactic hierarchy? They were technologically primitive compared to most Confederation species. Their ships were slower, their weapons less advanced, their territory limited to a single star system. By every measurable standard, they should have been a junior species, grateful for guidance from their betters. But nothing about humanity suggested they would accept such a position. That is what we are attempting to determine, the chairman said, carefully. Let me save you some time, Ambassador Rodriguez replied. Humanity does not accept hierarchies imposed by others. We cooperate with species who treat us as equals. We defend ourselves against species who see us as subordinate. It's really very simple. You cannot defend yourselves against the Confederation military, Commodore Thex said with a dismissive gesture. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Our technology was centuries behind itself 70 years ago, Ambassador Rodriguez countered. We went from first flight to landing on our moon in 66 years. We're very good at catching up when motivated. I'd prefer not to be motivated in that particular way. The implied threat hung in the air. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. This is unnecessary hostility, the chairman said. We can resolve this diplomatically. I agree, Ambassador Rodriguez said. And the first step in that resolution is acknowledging that your youth assessment protocols are incompatible with human psychology and will not be used on Earth again. That sets a dangerous precedent, Thelex objected. If one species can refuse standard protocols, others will follow. Then perhaps your protocols need revision, Ambassador Rodriguez suggested. Have you considered that? The protocols have been effective for 3 centuries, the chairman began. The protocols assume that all species respond to intimidation the same way, interrupted Ambassador Velkoth of the Quillian Alliance. She had been silent until now, but her voice carried weight. We Quillians are prey species. We evolved to flee from danger. Your protocols work on us because they trigger our instinctive responses. But humans are not prey species. They are not apex predators either, Commodore Thex argued. Our classifications indicate they are tool-using omnivores. Your classifications are incomplete, Velkoth replied. I have studied the human homeworld. It is a Class 4 death world with extreme environmental variation. Humans evolved alongside creatures that could kill them easily. They survived not through physical superiority, but through persistence, cooperation, and refusing to submit. You cannot intimidate a species that evolved by being too stubborn to die. That is an oversimplification, the chairman said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Velkoth asked. Ambassador Zekthor, in your 3 days at the human camp, did you ever observe a genuine fear response from any juvenile? Zekthor hesitated. No, he finally admitted. They showed caution at times, curiosity frequently, excitement often, but never fear. And the adults? Velkoth pressed. The same, Zekthor said quietly. One of them, Sergeant Davis, even critiqued our tactical displays and suggested improvements. Several council members made sounds of disbelief. "Show them," Ambassador Rodriguez said. "Show them the recordings from the final day." Zekthor activated his personal datapad, transmitting the files to the council's display system. The holographic screens showed the events of the juveniles' final day at camp. Director Chen had organized something called a haunted house fundraiser, and the juveniles had insisted that the Valorian team participate as special guests. The council watched as human juveniles led Zekthor and his team through a building they had decorated with frightening imagery. Artificial monsters lunged from dark corners. Sound effects created atmosphere. The juveniles had painted their faces to look injured or diseased, and pretended to be creatures from their horror stories. The council watched as Zekthor, veteran of 47 diplomatic missions, experienced genuine startlement when a 9-year-old in a werewolf costume jumped out from behind a door. His frills had extended involuntarily, and he had made an undignified sound of surprise. The juveniles had thought this was hilarious and asked if he was okay. "They created an environment designed to frighten others," Thelax said slowly. "Then they invited you into it for entertainment. It was a fundraiser," Ambassador Rodriguez explained. "They charged admission and donated the money to wildlife conservation. Apparently, they made enough to adopt 3 endangered species. They used fear as a tool to help other beings," Silith said, wonder in her voice. "Not as a weapon, but as a gift. They also thoroughly frightened your ambassador," Commodore Thex noted with what might have been amusement. "The juveniles apologized extensively afterward," Zekthor said, his scales flushing with embarrassment. "They had not realized I would experience genuine fear. They thought I understood it was pretend, because to them fear is something you play with," Velkoth said. "It is a toy, not a weapon. They practice being scared and practice being brave in equal measure." The chairman was silent for a long moment, reviewing the data. Finally, he spoke. "This council owes the humans an apology. Ambassador Rodriguez, please accept our regrets for this incident." "Apology accepted," Ambassador Rodriguez said, "assuming it comes with policy changes." "It will," the chairman said. "Effective immediately. Valorian youth assessment protocols are suspended for all Deathworld species pending comprehensive review. We clearly have gaps in our understanding of how different evolutionary backgrounds affect psychological development. Furthermore," Velkoth added, "I recommend that Earth be reclassified. The current Category 2 Deathworld designation is clearly insufficient." "Agreed," the chairman said. "Earth is hereby designated a Category 4 Deathworld. Humans are classified as a non-subordinate species. Standard dominance protocols are not to be attempted." "What does that mean practically?" Ambassador Rodriguez asked. "It means humanity is recognized as equal partners in the Confederation," Velkoth explained. "Not junior members requiring guidance, but fully autonomous allies who choose their own path. It also means," Commodore Thex added with a slight smile, "that I am very glad we did not attempt military intimidation. Based on what I have seen, that would have gone poorly." "Very poorly," Ambassador Rodriguez agreed. "One question," Thelax said. "If humans do not respond to intimidation, how do you maintain social order? How do you teach juveniles appropriate behavior?" "We teach them to think," Ambassador Rodriguez replied simply. "We teach them consequences, empathy, and responsibility. We teach them that their actions affect others. It is not perfect, but it works for us." "Fascinating," Thelax murmured. "Absolutely fascinating." The council meeting concluded with formal apologies, reclassifications, and recommendations for future Human Confederation interactions.